أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على الحبيب محمد وآله وصحبه أجمعين. So we continue with our Seerah series. I know we took 2 weeks off because I was traveling, so jazakumullah khair for your patience. So we're just going to recap a little bit where we are so that everybody's on the same page, and then continue from there inshallah with the first migration to Abyssinia. So again, just as a quick reminder, some of the situation in Mecca. What was the situation in Mecca? So we're around year 4 or 5 after Revelation. The first 3 years, if you remember, were more like the secret da'wah, where the Prophet ﷺ was conveying the da'wah to very select people, but it was not out in the masses yet. And then in year 3, the da'wah starts to go out in the masses. The people of Quraish think about what to do, and then they decide that their first level of strategy is that they're going to torture the people that accept Islam, definitely like the slaves that accept Islam, the people of status that accept Islam, their families and their tribes were trying to take care of them, either contain them, discourage them from accepting Islam, whichever strategies they used, and we went through multiple of those strategies. But again, the da'wah was out there in the public now in Mecca. We're around year 5. The number of Muslims were starting to increase. If you remember, we talked about around 40 Muslims by end of year 3 that had accepted Islam, and these were like your first of the first. And then by year 5, you're talking, numbers are increasing, not exponentially, but you're talking around like 50 to 60 or so Muslims in Mecca that are openly Muslim, and the oppression is intensifying because the people of Mecca still feel that the number of Muslims are small, 50, 60 Muslims, but they're worried that could spread. So they really continue to oppress them and torture as many as they can. Also, as a quick recap, we talked about those early days were very critical for building the Muslim foundation, the Muslim character. Again, it was really showing the importance of the tazkiyah, the importance of purifying the heart, the importance of understanding فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. There was no praying as in like 5 times praying. In some narrations there were like 2 prayers a day. There was no fasting of Ramadan. There was no zakah that was ordained yet. Absolutely no hajj, of course. So like all those things that we think about now as like the pillars of Islam, the main thing was the shahada. فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. That becomes ingrained in the heart, and that was the tazkiyah part of it. It was also a very important time so that people can all value the message, because there was almost no benefit from a worldly perspective that anybody would accept Islam. So it wasn't like the Muslims were not powerful, and there was not like money to be given to anybody, no fighting even allowed, so you won't get any like bounties of the war, like none of that. It was really like you're choosing the message for really believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and wanting to follow that straight path. So that's the purity of choice. And also it started to show the importance of this peaceful resistance, that the Muslims were steadfast, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not allowed them to fight. So they were not allowed to fight back. So it wasn't like they can fight back, or no, it was just like a peaceful resistance where they would show that they're steadfast and they're standing by Islam, but not allowed to fight back at this point yet. Now, here's where we stopped 2 weeks ago when we showed you the map. This star is around where Mecca is, and then they would have to cross a river and go into Abyssinia, which is back then supposed to be a pretty challenging trip. But again, we'll start inshallah from here. So a couple of things, as we said in the Khatira quickly, one of the early things before the Prophet ﷺ gave permission to the companions to go to Abyssinia is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah Al-Kahf. And when you actually read in Seerah ibn Ishaq and ibn Hisham, you're going to find a lot of pages that talk about Surah Al-Kahf just before the travel of Abyssinia. Because again, like the importance of it and how it was preparing the Muslims mentally and like the heart of the Muslims to understand the idea of sacrifice, to understand the idea that you're really just purely living for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that there will be challenges as we go through life, and how those challenges get navigated through the surah and the trials. So again, this was revealed. After that, the Prophet ﷺ gave permission to the Muslims to go to Abyssinia. I wanted to see, based on, this is what's narrated by Dhahabi, that the Prophet ﷺ said, لو خرجتم إلى أرض الحبشة. So the Prophet ﷺ is telling the companions, you could go, it's okay, if you want to go out to the land of Habasha, Abyssinia. And then the Prophet ﷺ explains to the companions why. The Prophet ﷺ says, فَإِنَّ بِهَا مَلِكًا لَا يُظْلَمْ عِنْدَهُ أَحَدٌ. In there is a king that nobody will be dealt unjustly at, like in front of that king. So basically this king upholds justice. So that's the first thing. وَهِيَ أَرْضُ صِدْقٍ. And the land is the land of truth. So this is the second reason. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, حَتَّى يَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ لَكُمْ فَرَجًا مِمَّا أَنْتُمْ فِيهِ. Until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you relief from that torture and that pressure that is going on against the Muslims. So let's just first understand what's happening. So the Prophet ﷺ tells them, you're allowed to go to Abyssinia. So this was not an order that you have to go to Abyssinia. This was an optional thing. You could stay in Mecca or you could go to Abyssinia. So that's the first thing. The second is, the Prophet ﷺ explains, this is, two things are in this land. One, the ruler is a just ruler. So justice. A lot of us might have left our countries because of lack of justice. So like this principle still holds as of now. You want to be somewhere where there is justice and you feel that you can be treated fairly. Regardless what those people are worshipping, whether it's a Muslim country, non-Muslim country, you just want justice and being treated fairly. That's like table stakes foundation for people and where they want to live. So the Prophet ﷺ is explaining, Habasha, Abyssinia, has a just king. You will be treated justly and you can be treated fairly over there. And here, Ardu Sidq. Ardu Sidq, there are a lot of explanations why it is, but one of it is also that their people are going to treat you in a good way. They're honest people, they were Christian, and they were honest people, and they will actually allow you to be integrated and treat you well. And there are other explanations around like why it's Ardu Sidq, but it will, just given the time, we won't go through it much. So basically, there's a just king, and the people will accept you, so you're allowed to travel. So this was the go-ahead from the Prophet ﷺ that they can do. So now, in the first migration to Abyssinia, let's be settled because there are two migrations that we'll talk through to Abyssinia in this discussion, inshallah. And I want to make sure we untangle them so that people don't get confused, because even a lot of the books combine them and people could get confused. So the first migration to Abyssinia happens in year 5 after Revelation, and based on most books of Seerah, it's in Rajab, month of Rajab, year 5 after Revelation. In that migration, 14, and the numbers vary, so like don't quote the exact numbers. When you look at different books, some books would say 14, some would say 13, some would say 15, but in general it's around the number 14, and that number is constructed around 10 men and 4 women are the ones that actually migrated. So what you can take from it is, it was a small number, but remember, the number of Muslims are small to start with, so you're not expecting that there are 300 migrating, because there weren't even 300 Muslims on the face of earth. But it's around 14 Muslims, blessed companions, that decide to migrate to Abyssinia. Now, I want you to hear some of those names, because usually when you think about the first migration to Abyssinia, you would think that these were Bilal, and like the people that were oppressed and slaves, and they were able to flee Mecca and migrate to Abyssinia. That's exactly the wrong picture of the first migration to Abyssinia. The first migration to Abyssinia was actually by people that, if you want to label them anything, they would be the elites of Mecca that had accepted Islam. So some of those people that migrated, just so you know, one of them is Uthman ibn Affan. Everybody knows Uthman ibn Affan, Sayyidina Uthman, the third Khalifa, Sayyidina Uthman. He's one of the people that migrated to Abyssinia. He didn't just migrate by himself. He actually had his wife with him. Anybody knows who his wife was? Sayyidah Ruqayya, radiallahu anha. She's the daughter of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So she was one of the people that actually migrated among those 14 people that migrated to Abyssinia. The other one is Sayyidina Uthman ibn Mad'un, and we talked about him before, and he was among the elite. If you remember, he's the one that was given protection by Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira in Mecca, that he can do anything and everything in Mecca. And then he went back to Al-Walid and he told Al-Walid, I don't want your protection. Allah is my protector. And then he actually got harassed by people in Mecca, and Al-Walid came back. We told you all the story about that. But Uthman ibn Mad'un is one of them. And in actually a lot of books, it's being said that he was the leader of the 14. Sayyidina Uthman ibn Mad'un, not Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan. Sayyidina Uthman ibn Mad'un was the leader of those 14. In a lot of the books, he's the leader of the 14 that migrated to Abyssinia. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, known as a very wealthy companion, and was wealthy before Islam and after Islam, and then left all his money and became again very wealthy in Medina. Abdurrahman ibn Auf was another one that migrated to Abyssinia. So again, you'll find very elite names of Muslims that were well off and well established and had protection in Mecca that decided to migrate to Abyssinia in the first migration. Again, the numbers around, call it 14 or so, 10 men, 4 women, and they migrate. Now they stay in Abyssinia not for long, by the way. So that's why some scholars, when you read some of the books, they combine it. So the first migration to Abyssinia, they stay less than a year or so in Abyssinia. And then they return to Mecca. And the reason they return to Mecca will go in a second. But so they return, and then there is a second migration to Abyssinia. So we'll go through both, inshallah. But so some of the important things to understand around the migration to Abyssinia, specifically the first one is the protection of religion. This is very much what we talked about in Surah Al-Kahf, so we don't want to take too long on it here. But the idea that some people sacrifice and say, you know what, we're just going to leave everything behind just to protect the religion. Just to take that religion to a place where we can worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also we can protect our own religion. Because nobody knew, remember, like in hindsight you can look at history and say, oh, we know exactly what has happened. Back then, the situation in Mecca was very tense, and nobody knew how that is going to evolve. So the Prophet ﷺ and the companions were putting together multiple plans around like, how will we make sure Islam survives? How will we make sure Islam gets given to other people outside of Mecca? So one strategy was, let's have people go to Abyssinia and establish something there. And that's why, by the way, the scholars, when they look at it, they would tell you that that's why some of those elite Muslims, the well-off Muslims, the ones that can represent Islam there, can make money, build things, do stuff, are the ones that engaged into the first migration of Abyssinia. So again, one is to protect the religion. The second one is new da'wah venues. You're going to actually find new people in Abyssinia. You can convey the message of Islam to them. So that's another one. And then the third one, which is very critical, is the potential new base. Nobody knew Medina, at least from the companions, that Medina will be the place where it will be the actual new base. But the Prophet ﷺ was putting different strategies. One of them was, it might have been Abyssinia, that you go and this becomes the actual base where people migrate to it later on. So again, multiple reasons that the Muslims went there. Again, they stayed around a year or so and went back. Now during this year, plus minus around that, a couple of very critical things happened. 2 great things happened first, which is around year 6, based on most books of Seerah. We're trying to neutralize, when you read multiple books of Seerah, you're going to find different views. I'm just giving you the most prominent one, but if you have any more details, we can discuss them, inshallah. So around year 6, 2 very important people enter Islam that changed the dynamic in Mecca, big time. The first one that enters in year 6 is Sayyidina Hamzah radiallahu anhu. Sayyidina Hamzah radiallahu anhu enters Islam. His story is narrated in most books of Seerah, and it's an interesting story. So basically, the Prophet ﷺ was next to the Kaaba, and Abu Jahl comes, and he becomes very aggressive with the Prophet ﷺ, like he usually was. But he insults the Prophet, and transgresses on the Prophet ﷺ, and then the Prophet ﷺ leaves. Sayyidina Hamzah was out hunting, so he had his, like everything on. He comes, and the narration says he actually comes from the side of the Safa, and then he sees a lady, an Amma, over there that tells him, you haven't heard while you were hunting what has happened to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And then she starts to explain to him how Abu Jahl was so tough on the Prophet ﷺ. And Sayyidina Hamzah radiallahu anhu, remember, at that point, he still had not accepted Islam. But for him, you need to realize, Sayyidina Hamzah was the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, but the age difference is around 2 years. So he's really, and when you think the Prophet ﷺ did not have brothers, and the Prophet ﷺ did not have a father or a mother, Sayyidina Hamzah was his older brother, his real older brother. Again, he's an uncle, and by the way, they also are brothers from the feeding. So Sayyidina Hamzah hears that and gets very angry that the Prophet ﷺ was insulted in Mecca. And he goes, confronts Abu Jahl, and says to Abu Jahl, he basically had his things on. In one narration, he takes a bow and arrow, and he actually injures Abu Jahl. And then Abu Jahl is among his people, basically sitting next to the Kaaba among his people, and Sayyidina Hamzah stands in front of him, injures him, and then tells him, how dare you that you insult the Prophet ﷺ when I'm on his religion? And then the people of Abu Jahl want to stand up and fight with Sayyidina Hamzah. Bani Hashim comes for Sayyidina Hamzah, and then Abu Jahl says, enough, I have been very nasty to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Let's that settle. We don't want to fight with Hamzah. And basically, the narration says, as of now, Sayyidina Hamzah, his heart was still not connected to Islam. He did that out of love for the Prophet ﷺ, but he wasn't really convinced with Islam yet. And in some narration, he stayed overnight, and another narration that he went immediately to the Prophet ﷺ. But whichever narration you want to take, he basically eventually went to the Prophet ﷺ, and then the Prophet ﷺ told him more about Islam, and then he was fully convinced, and then he declared his Shahada, Sayyidina Hamzah radiallahu anhu. And this is how he accepted Islam. By the way, in some narrations, in some books of Seerah, you're going to find they put this story very early on, in year 2, but it doesn't really jive with a lot of other factual, Seerah facts. So most likely, it's in year 6, and this is where most scholars put it in year 6. This is where Sayyidina Hamzah radiallahu anhu accepts Islam. And that becomes a big opening for Muslims in Mecca, because Sayyidina Hamzah has his status, and that was a huge power that was added to the Muslim camp. Now, in some narrations, just 3 days after, 3 days, the Prophet ﷺ makes dua. And the Prophet ﷺ makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah mansur هذا الدين بأحد العمرين. That, oh Allah, support this religion with one of those 2 Umars. Now I want you to understand who are those 2 Umars, because it's very important. One of those Umars is Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu. But the other Umar is Amr ibn Hisham. So Amr ibn Hisham is who? Is Abu Jahl. So Abu Jahl had such a status, and his real name is Amr ibn Hisham. So the Prophet ﷺ was making dua, oh Allah, one of those 2 very strong people in Mecca, Umar ibn al-Khattab or Abu Jahl. Amr ibn Hisham, by the way, his nickname back then was Abu al-Hakam. He was like the very wise person for them. Just have one of them accept Islam, because it's going to give us this strength in Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ was making that dua. And they say that 3 days after Sayyidina Hamzah accepted Islam, there are 2 narrations for Sayyidina Umar's Islam. One that you all know of, this is a weaker narration, but so we'll say it very quickly. It's a weaker narration, just so that we're clear. But so we'll say it because this is what's written in most books, but when you see the takhriq of them, it's a weak narration. That Sayyidina Umar was going and wanting to harm the Prophet ﷺ. And he had his armor on as well, and wanted to find where the Prophet ﷺ is. And then he actually meets a person that had just accepted Islam and was not public with it. So when he learned that Sayyidina Umar was going to harm the Prophet ﷺ, trying to reach the Prophet ﷺ to harm him, so he wanted to distract him. So he told him, instead of going after Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, go after your household. Go check on your sister and her husband, because they have accepted Islam. So instead of trying to harm the Prophet ﷺ, go just take care of your own family first. So Sayyidina Umar backs and goes to his sister and basically asks her, what is going on? Here's what I heard. And then they basically come through in front of Sayyidina Umar and say, yep, we have accepted Islam, that she has accepted Islam, her husband has accepted Islam. In one narration, Sayyidina Umar beats her on her face, so she starts to bleed. And Sayyidina Umar used to love his sister very much, so his heart starts to soften, that he just hit his sister and she's bleeding. So he calms down a little bit, and then he tells her, let me hear about the stuff that you have accepted. And they start to recite for him, Taha, ma anzalna alayka al-Qur'ana litashqa. And he listens to the ayat of Taha, and then immediately he accepts Islam. He basically says, I want to go to the Prophet ﷺ and declare my shahada in front of the Prophet ﷺ. In the other narration, we'll get back to the shahada piece because they both agree on it. In the other narration that is more stronger, it does not have all those pieces. It has that actually he was going after the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ went next to the Kaaba and started praying. And that Sayyidina Umar started to hear some of the ayat. It was not Taha, but he started to hear the Prophet ﷺ reciting ayat, and that started to cool his heart, radiallahu anhu, and then he asked for the Prophet ﷺ and went to Dar al-Arqam and accepted Islam there. So whichever narration you want to take, it doesn't matter all the details. What matters is Sayyidina Umar was very much against Islam, heard the Quran, because he heard it whether from his sister or whether the Prophet ﷺ was reciting it, it entered his heart, and then he accepted Islam, radiallahu anhu. So he goes to Dar al-Arqam where the Prophet ﷺ was, and Sayyidina Hamzah was in there, and several other companions, including Sayyidina Abu Bakr, Sayyidina Umar, multiple companions. And they hear Sayyidina Umar, that Sayyidina Umar is knocking on the door. They still don't know that he's going to accept Islam. And they see that he's in his armor. So the companions that were with the Prophet ﷺ, they say, this is Umar ibn al-Khattab. And he seems to be coming fully in his armor. And that is trouble. So what do we do? So the person who was in there was Sayyidina Hamzah. Sayyidina Hamzah in that narration tells them, you guys back off, go into the rooms of the house of Al-Arqam, Nabi Al-Arqam, and let me handle Umar. If he wants trouble, I can handle him. And they say that Hamzah is the one that opened to Sayyidina Umar the door and let him in, and that the Prophet ﷺ was with Sayyidina Hamzah as well. And then Sayyidina Umar, when he entered in, he immediately told him that he's coming to declare his shahada. So the Prophet ﷺ talked with him, he declared his shahada. In one narration that shows you also Sayyidina Umar, and that narration actually says this is why he's called Al-Furqan, that the Prophet ﷺ called him Al-Faruq, Umar. That in that narration, it says that after Sayyidina Umar accepts Islam, the Muslims, all of them that were in Dar al-Arqam, they basically line up in two rows. One row is led by Hamzah radiallahu anhu and all the Muslims behind him. And the other row led by Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu and all the other Muslims behind him. And the Prophet ﷺ in the middle. And they walk proudly to the Kaaba, doing all the things they want to do. And nobody from Mecca was able to approach them. Because now you have the Prophet ﷺ in the middle, and you have Sayyidina Hamzah anchoring one group, and nobody wants to touch Sayyidina Hamzah, and you have Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu anchoring another group, and nobody wants to come close to Sayyidina Umar and fight with him. And that's why they said that the Prophet ﷺ called him Al-Faruq, because when he came in, he distinguished between the right and the wrong, and Islam was able to flourish. And a lot of narrations tell us that the companions say that we could not practice our religion openly next to the Kaaba until Umar radiallahu anhu accepted Islam. When Umar accepted Islam radiallahu anhu, things changed. The power dynamic changed. With Hamzah and Umar now Muslims, the power dynamic in Mecca changed, and people started to be able to accept, to practice Islam, which actually also helped when you look at the numbers and how many Muslims then came into Islam. Most narrations put Sayyidina Umar around 65 to 70 in terms of the number, his rank in terms of accepting Islam, around 65 to 70 in numbers. You'll find that the second migration to Abyssinia, there were more than 100, around 100 Muslims that migrated to Abyssinia. So the numbers actually then started to increase because for the first time, the Muslims are able to practice openly and they're able to give the da'wah openly, and people are actually also less fearful to accept Islam because now you have two strongholds, Sayyidina Hamzah and Sayyidina Umar, that are anchoring the camp of the Muslims. I also want you, when you think about the Islam of Sayyidina Hamzah, to always compare, because this is a pure heart, Sayyidina Hamzah, that he stood for the love of the Prophet ﷺ. When he heard that Abu Jahl insulted the Prophet ﷺ, he could not take it. Those are the true hearts that win at the end. He accepted Islam, he won, became a martyr, Sayyid al-Shuhada, Hamzah, buried in Uhud. We visit him as anybody that goes to Medina would definitely go to Uhud and would definitely go visit the grave of Sayyidina Hamzah radiallahu anhu, will make dua over there. These are your true winners. I want you to compare between that heart and the heart of Abu Lahab, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ. Was also very happy when the Prophet ﷺ was born, but then envy conquered the heart. So when he heard that the Prophet ﷺ is a messenger, he could not take it. He's like, no, we cannot compete with that. I will not believe. And Abu Lahab, uncle. Hamzah, uncle. But Hamzah has a golden heart. Abu Lahab has a dark heart. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals in the Quran, تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبٍّ. Something that we always need to remember until, anytime you're reciting Quran, you're going, this is a name, by name, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling out an uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, so that you always remember. Those are the times where your heart makes the decision. So always make sure your heart is with loving the Prophet ﷺ. If you're going to lean on any side, always love the Prophet ﷺ. Don't and never be against the people that love the Prophet ﷺ. Even if you don't understand fully what's happening, just give them their leeway. The love of the Prophet ﷺ is something that is extremely, extremely valuable. So again, Sayyidina Hamzah radiallahu anhu, Sayyidina Umar, and again in a lot of narrations, only 3 days ahead, between them. Both accept, this is year 6 of Bi'tha, and the dynamic changes in Mecca. And then another thing starts to happen, which is the Prophet ﷺ now is reciting openly Quran in Mecca. Remember, now we have a stronghold, so that we're able to do more things in front of the Kaaba. And the Prophet ﷺ is reciting Surah Al-Najm. And this incident is mentioned almost in all books of Seerah. The Prophet ﷺ is reciting Surah Al-Najm. And remember, back then, they would tell the non-believers would tell each other, don't listen to the Prophet ﷺ because he's a magician, he's going to impact you, whatever. But because now he's openly reciting Surah Al-Najm, they had to listen. So the Prophet ﷺ is reciting Surah Al-Najm and they're all listening. And the Prophet ﷺ comes to the ayah of prostration and prostrates, and all of Mecca prostrates, even the non-believers. Because they were so influenced by the Quran that they just followed it. So when the prostration ayah came, they all prostrated. And most kutub of Seerah tell you that this incident was conveyed to the people of Abyssinia. Remember our 14 brave people in Abyssinia? So they hear now, Umar accepted Islam. Hamzah accepted Islam. All of Mecca is prostrating and the Prophet ﷺ is reading Quran out loud. So what do? They're like, we're going to come back. Khalas. Mecca is either all accepted Islam or they're now soft. They're accepting the idea of having Muslims among them. And we don't want to just live away. So they actually head back. The 14 come back because of that rumor or misinformation that they heard, or at least understood, when the situation wasn't like that, of course. The torture was increasing, but Muslims were becoming a little bit stronger as well. So anyways, they come back, and then when they come closer to Mecca, they hear the real news, which is no, torture is still ongoing, things are still very tough, and things are hard. So some of the 14 decide they will go back to Abyssinia, and then most of the 14 come back to Mecca. And then the Prophet ﷺ still tells the companions that it is okay to start to migrate to Abyssinia. Now remember, we already had 14 people went there, so it became a little bit more known to the Muslims what to expect. And you had your first group that went, now they know something, they have something established. So now when they came back, it's easier, at least from an idea perspective, for folks to leave. Now people of Mecca were making it harder for them to leave because they didn't want them to leave. But so what has happened is that then several groups of Muslims start to leave to Abyssinia. Particularly that around year 7, the strategy will shift. We won't go into that today, but the strategy will shift of the non-believers in Mecca, where it's going to be a strategy of a full boycott, which will go in, inshallah, next time or a later time. So the strategy is going to shift and it's going to be very aggressive and very tough to sustain within that strategy, where nobody is buying from you, nobody is selling to you, nobody is marrying from you, nobody is talking to you. So it's going to be a very tough siege, very much like the stuff you're seeing on Gaza when there was a full siege. That's a bit what they were doing, and then banning any food from coming in, up to that the Prophet ﷺ and the companions would be just eating anything from the ground, like just pieces of trees falling down, leaves basically falling down, they would eat them. So again, the situation would be very dire, which pushed a lot of the companions to migrate. So the second migration to Abyssinia, here are just some of the facts. Around 100 companions. I mean, this is almost like all of the Muslims that were able to migrate. Around 100 Muslims, 82 men and 18 women migrate to Abyssinia in the second migration. Okay? The leader of those is Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. Sayyidina Ja'far is the cousin of the Prophet ﷺ. He's the older brother of Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib that you all know of. Sayyidina Ja'far is the closest that looks similar to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ told him that he has his khuluq and khalq. He looks the most similar to the Prophet ﷺ, and he has the most similar character to the Prophet ﷺ. Sayyidina Ja'far is in a very different status. And he is the leader of the companions that migrate. Some of the companions that migrated as well, just for reference, they will come later in the Seerah, inshallah. Salama, that is going to marry the Prophet ﷺ later on, in years and years. She was one of the people that had migrated in this second migration to Abyssinia. She's actually the one that narrates most of the ahadith of what has happened, the instances that have happened in Abyssinia come from Salama. The situation with the Najashi, all this stuff, Salama is the one that narrates a lot of those. Habiba is also somebody that actually migrates to Abyssinia, and the Prophet ﷺ marries Habiba remotely when she's in Abyssinia. So we'll get to that at a later point, because again, the people in Abyssinia in the second migration, the first one, remember we said just like a couple of months, call it a year, was the first migration to Abyssinia. The second migration to Abyssinia is a very long one. When you count the years, they come back right after Khaybar. So right after Khaybar is when the people come back with Sayyidina Ja'far from Abyssinia to Medina. So when was Khaybar? Khaybar is year 7 after Hijrah. And we're now talking, we are around year 6 or 7 after Revelation. So Prophet ﷺ stays 13 years in Mecca before Hijrah. So we're in year 7. So you still have like 5-6 years. And then the Prophet ﷺ would migrate. And then he would go until Khaybar, which is year 7 after migration. So you're talking around like 13 years or so that they would stay in Abyssinia. So they will stay a long time in Abyssinia. Okay? So anyways, these are some of the people that have migrated. We just want to highlight one incident that we will go into detail, inshallah, next week. So not this week, but just want to make sure we highlight briefly one of the things that have happened. So after the second migration of Abyssinia, the people of Quraysh did not like that. They did not like the idea that now the Muslims are 100 strong, somewhere worshipping, they can convey the message, they can do whatever they want. So they decide to send two of their smartest people to negotiate with the Najashi, the king of Abyssinia, to return the Muslims to Mecca. And they send two of their smartest, which is Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah, and they basically go and negotiate with the Najashi to get them back. So they're very smart, as you would expect. So I'll just give you high level what has happened, and then next time, inshallah, we're going to go into way more detail, because there are so many learnings when you take that discussion as a case study for da'wah. It's unbelievable. Yani if you want to learn da'wah, you should attend next week, inshallah, to see how da'wah was done by Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. We just talked about Sayyidina Ja'far, how he actually delivered the da'wah to the Najashi in the best possible way. But we'll give you just a high level overview of what has happened without going into details. We'll go into details next time, inshallah. So Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah, they go, and first things first, they want to go to the Najashi. What they do is they bring a lot of presents with them. Think bribes, okay? But they're presents like we do nowadays. Presents, they're just presents. It's good. Always good to label things differently so that people don't understand what they are. So they are presents, so they get a lot of presents with them, and they give everybody around the Najashi a lot of presents. And then they tell them, you know what, we're going to meet the Najashi now, and you guys are his close advisors, you're going to be with us in the meeting. We don't want anything from you other than that we're going to ask that he returns our people. And of course, you guys agree that he should return our people because we're good friends and we just gave you so many presents and these are our people, so have him return them. They're like, absolutely, we're good on that deal. So basically that's what happens. They go in front of the Najashi and they put the request forward and they say, and they're very wise actually, we'll go through it inshallah next time. But when Amr ibn al-As makes the case, he makes the case very smartly, because he just doesn't just say, oh, like some of our people are here. He says, there are people that came to your land, so he's acknowledging the Najashi and his power, and this is his land, that came into your land, that left our religion, because he knows the Najashi is a very religious person, so he's focused on the religion side. Like, they left our religion and their ancestors' religion, and they did not accept to enter into your religion, but they're still in your land, and they're like following this new religion that could be a threat to all of us, including your religion. And by the way, we know them best, so give them to us. That's the case they make. And then of course, they look at the people around the Najashi, so they all took the presents and were happy. So they say, yes, Najashi, you should absolutely bring them back. Like this is clear. Like just give them. Who cares? But the Najashi, remember the Prophet ﷺ, when he told him, he said, "Go. This is a just person, and this is a land of justice. This nonsense is not going to fly." So the Najashi actually stops that nonsense, and with his justice, he says, "No. I'm not going to make a verdict until I hear them. I'm not just going to make a one-sided verdict. I need to hear those people that you're talking about, that you just made the case against. I need to hear what they have to say, and then I'm going to make my verdict." So they call for them, and Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib comes as the leader with some of his companions, and he battles, he answers. And this is what we're not going to go into detail with, because we're going to go next time in it, inshallah. But he answers the Najashi to explain what Islam is truly all about. And honestly, you have to, next week, inshallah, open your hearts and minds to how he makes the case for Islam. Because we make a very different case to our kids. And we make a very different case to non-Muslims. So we want to make sure that we understand how Sayyidina Ja'far radiallahu anhu made the case for Islam in front of the Najashi and in front of Amr ibn al-As and all the others, and how he made the true case. Now when he makes the case, by the way, the Najashi accepts his case. And he says, I'm not going to let you take them. I'm fully convinced with what Ja'far said. But Amr, being Amr, he's not convinced. So he exits that meeting and he says, okay, I'm going to come tomorrow and I'm going to figure out a way where I'm going to get those 100 companions almost killed. I don't need them anymore to come back, but I want to make sure that the Najashi is very upset with them, that they get prosecuted or something happens. And actually his companion Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'a, he tells him, have some mercy, Amr. Even if we disagree with them, they're among us. So even if they left us, let's not do your trick here and try to get them killed by the Najashi. But Amr says, nope, I'm going to do it. And his idea was that he's going to go and tell the Najashi, I want you to hear what they say about Isa, alayhi salam, because they say that Isa is a abd, is a slave. And he thought with that trick, he would be able to make sure that the Najashi and his people around him totally refuse to host, yet alone even they might harm the Muslims there. Interesting thing is Sayyidina Ja'far, and again this is what we'll cover next time inshallah, goes into a very interesting explanation of what we believe in Sayyidina Isa radiallahu anh, and very honest to our belief system, and the Najashi actually accepts that. And the outcome of this very interesting discussion, just so that we are all clear, is that Najashi himself accepts Islam. Subhanallah. He stays, he doesn't say it out loud, but we know that the Prophet ﷺ prays Salat al-Ghaib on the Najashi. And we know that when the Prophet ﷺ marries Habiba, that the Najashi is the one that marries Habiba to him. So we have a lot of evidence that supports that Najashi actually accepts Islam, because he understood the purity of the message, the truthfulness of the message, and because of those golden companions that stood for what's right and conveyed the message in the right way. And again, inshallah, next time we'll go through detail through it. We'll conclude with this one. This is just the conclusion, don't worry about it, it's not going to take too much. But there was a very interesting discussion in Kutub al-Seerah where Sayyidah Asma bint Umays. So if you don't know who Sayyidah Asma bint Umays, you should know. Sayyidah Asma was the wife of Sayyidina Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. They were just talked about. But when you read after that, Sayyidina Ja'far of course gets martyred, and then at a later stage she marries Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And at a later stage she even marries Sayyidina Omar. And she's a very important person in the Seerah of Islam. So you definitely need to know that name, Sayyidah Asma bint Umays. Now, she was having a discussion with Sayyidina Omar. Okay? And Sayyidina Omar was entering his house. Sayyidah Asma was there with Sayyidina Omar's wife. And then Sayyidina Omar asks, who is here with you? She says, Sayyidina Omar's wife says, Asma bint Umays. And he says, the person of the ship, meaning the person that went to Abyssinia. And then basically he tells her, sabaqnakum bil hijrah. Remember, they came, this happens later on. Remember, they came from Abyssinia, I just told you, after Khaybar, in year 7 after Hijrah. So she meets Sayyidina Umar after that. And Sayyidina Umar tells her, sabaqnakum bil hijrah, we have migrated 7 years ahead of you with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we have more claim to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam than you. Now Sayyidah Asma was not somebody that will take that lightly. She's like, no, you have to be kidding me. You're telling me after being in Habasha for 12, 13 years that you have more claim to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam because you migrated earlier than I did? So she was not happy with that. And she said, no, absolutely not. She said, you were with the Prophet ﷺ and he would feed you. He would make dua for you. He would give you guidance. He would do all that stuff. And we were in Habasha, alone, fearful, not having anything. And we only did that for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. وَذَلِكَ فِي اللَّهِ وَفِي رَسُولِهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. And then she said, by Allah, I will not eat or drink until I go to the Prophet ﷺ and tell him exactly what you said, Umar. And I will not increase anything or reduce anything. And I will come with a solution from the Prophet ﷺ. I'm not going to sit on that. And I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink. I'm going to the Prophet ﷺ. I need to tell him what you said. And she goes to the Prophet ﷺ. And she says that the Prophet ﷺ, that Umar ibn al-Khattab is saying that they have more claim to you, O Prophet ﷺ, because they migrated with you, and that we have migrated after them with like whatever, 7 years or so. And the Prophet ﷺ tells her, and how did you respond to him, Asma? And she said, no, I did not like it. And I told him that it doesn't work. And she basically explained to the Prophet ﷺ everything that she said. And the Prophet ﷺ then answers. And this gives you just a glimpse of the status of those people. And how, by the way, this is in Sahih al-Bukhari. So you can go, this is as authentic as it gets, inshallah. The Prophet ﷺ says, قال صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس بأحق بي منكم. As in, Sayyidina Umar has no more claim over me, as in the Prophet ﷺ, than you guys have. Meaning, nobody has superiority here. There is nothing that he migrated earlier. وَلَهُ وَلِأَصْحَابِهِ هِجْرَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. That Umar and his friends get a reward for the hijrah that they did with me. وَلَكُمْ أَنْتُمْ أَهْلِ السَّفِينَةِ هِجْرَتَانِ. But you people of Abyssinia, Safina because they had to cross the river. You people of Abyssinia, you're going to get the reward of 2 hijras, not just 1. And Sayyidah Asma, when she got that, and Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, the people, everybody there, all those 100, in the narration says that they would always come and check with Sayyidah Asma and reconfirm that hadith to make sure that their status is known, and to reassure themselves that those 13 years that they stayed in Abyssinia were worth gold, were worth a lot. The Prophet ﷺ said, no, nobody has more claim. لَيْسَ بِأَحَقِّ بِي مِنْكُمْ. Sayyidina Umar cannot claim to have more to the Prophet ﷺ, but he, as in the Umar radiallahu anhu, and his companions get 1 hijrah, and the people of the Safina get 2 hijras. So again, these were very, very blessed people. And again, they sacrificed being away from the Prophet ﷺ. And when the scholars look at that, they have a lot of discussion around why did they not return earlier? And a lot of them come to the conclusion of it was all still a command by the Prophet ﷺ that at least as Muslims we might have a second home in Abyssinia. That if things don't work out in Mecca, if things become tougher in Medina, that at least we have another place and Islam continues to thrive and Muslims can go somewhere else where they have already occupied some space. So again, a lot of strategic thinking and a lot of decision making that is happening, but at the end of the day, all of them is like Sayyidah Asma said here, وَذَلِكَ فِي اللَّهِ وَفِي رَسُولِهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. All their actions are pure to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All their actions are pure to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what distinguishes all those actions. Whether you were right next to the Prophet ﷺ, whether you were thousands of miles away, as long as your action is pure to the Prophet ﷺ and you stay true to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger ﷺ, then you're getting the reward and you're getting multiples and multiples of those rewards. So this is where we will stop, inshallah. Next time we will do a case study on the da'wah to Najashi that Sayyidina Ja'far did, because again there are so many lessons that are very useful for us here if we're thinking of doing da'wah. And then inshallah after that we'll go through the boycott that took around like 3 years or so, and that will get us to around year 10 of Ba'ath, inshallah. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to what pleases Him and make us follow in the footsteps of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and make our hearts steadfast on Islam. And oh Allah, show us the right path and make us follow it, and show us falsehood as falsehood and make us avoid it. Oh Allah, make us implement Islam in our life and make us role models to people that are around us. Oh Allah, we ask You from everything that is good that Prophet Muhammad has asked for, and we ask You to protect us from everything that's evil that Prophet Muhammad has asked for protection from. Allahumma ighfir lana dhunubana wa israfana fi amrina wa thabbit aqdamana wa ansurna ala al-qawmi al-kafirin. Rabbana hab lana min azwajina wa dhurriyyatina qurrata a'yun waj'alna lil-muttaqina imama. Rabbana ighfir lana wa li ikhwanina alladhina sabaquna bil iman wa la taj'al fi qulubina ghillan lil ladhina amanu rabbana innaka ra'ufur rahim. Allahumma inna nas'aluka min khayri ma sa'alaka minhu nabiyyuka Muhammadun sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa na'udhu bika min sharri ma ista'adhaka minhu nabiyyuka Muhammadun sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allahumma arda 'an as-sahabati ajma'in wajma'hum ma'a al-hayy Muhammadin في الفردوس الأعلى واجمعنا معهم يا أرحم الراحمين وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين، اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين، اللهم اشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين وارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين.